The summer of 2008 in Orlando, Florida, began like any other. Warm air, long days, and families going about their lives. But behind one front door, something was terribly wrong. A 2-year-old girl named Caylee Anthony had vanished, and for 31 days, her mother never reported her missing. No panic. No calls to police. Just silence. And when the truth finally surfaced, it would unravel into one of the most disturbing and controversial criminal cases in American history. This is the story of Caylee Anthony. A young mother whose lies would shock the nation, whose trial would divide millions, and whose verdict still sparks debate to this day. Caylee Anthony lived with her parents, George and Cindy, and her daughter Caylee. On the outside, it looked like a typical family home. But cracks beneath the surface were already forming. Caylee was known to exaggerate, to bend the truth, even to fabricate entire stories about her life. She claimed to work at Universal Studios, a lie that would later be exposed in one of the most bizarre moments of the investigation. Everything changed on June 15, 2008. That was the last day Caylee Anthony was seen alive. Caylee later claimed she dropped her daughter off with a nanny named Zanny, but there was one major problem. Zanny the nanny didn't exist. Days turned into weeks, and still, no report was filed. It wasn't until July 15, 2008, that Cindy Anthony finally called 911. Her voice was frantic. She reported that her granddaughter had been missing for a month and that Caylee's car smelled like there had been a dead body inside. That single call would launch a nationwide search and ignite a media firestorm. Police quickly zeroed in on Caylee Anthony. Her behavior raised immediate red flags. Instead of searching for her missing child, she was seen partying, entering a hot body contest, and living as if nothing had happened. To investigators, this wasn't the behavior of a grieving mother. It was something else entirely. When questioned, Caylee spun a web of lies so complex it became almost surreal. She led detectives on a wild chase, even taking them to Universal Studios where she claimed she worked. But when pressed, she admitted she didn't actually have a job there. It was all fabricated. As pressure mounted, Caylee was arrested on charges of child neglect and obstruction. But the real question remained: where was Caylee? Months later, in December 2008, a utility worker discovered skeletal remains in a wooded area not far from the Anthony home. The remains were identified as Caylee Anthony. The nation held its breath as the case transformed from a missing child investigation into a homicide trial. Prosecutors argued that Caylee Anthony had deliberately killed her daughter. Their theory was chilling. They believed Caylee used chloroform to render Caylee unconscious, then suffocated her with duct tape. Evidence presented included internet searches for chloroform and suffocation, as well as the presence of duct tape found near the remains. The prosecution painted Caylee as a young woman desperate to escape the responsibilities of motherhood, someone who wanted freedom at any cost. To them, Caylee was an obstacle. But the defense told a completely different story. They claimed Caylee's death was a tragic accident, suggesting she had drowned in the family pool. According to the defense, Caylee's father, George Anthony, helped cover up the death. It was a shocking accusation, one that added even more complexity to an already tangled case. The defense also argued that Caylee's pattern of lying stemmed from a dysfunctional family dynamic, where truth and deception were constantly blurred. They insisted that while Caylee may have lied, it didn't make her a murderer. Now, before we go deeper into the evidence and theories, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and join Shadow Files. If you're drawn to cases that challenge what we think we know about truth and justice, you're in the right place. The trial of Caylee Anthony began in 2011 and quickly became a media spectacle. Every detail was dissected, every piece of evidence debated. Millions of viewers watched as attorneys clashed in a courtroom drama that felt almost unreal. One of the most controversial elements was the forensic evidence. Experts testified about the smell in Caylee's car, suggesting it was consistent with human decomposition. Air samples appeared to support this claim, but the science behind it was heavily challenged. Then there was the chloroform. Searches found on the family computer included terms like chloroform and neck-breaking. Prosecutors argued this showed premeditation. The defense countered that the searches were unreliable and could not be definitively linked to Caylee. Duct tape found near Caylee's remains became another focal point. Prosecutors said it was used as a murder weapon. The defense argued it could have been placed there after the fact or was unrelated entirely. As the trial progressed, doubt began to creep in. Not necessarily about whether Caylee was involved, but about whether the prosecution could prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she intentionally killed her daughter. That phrase, beyond a reasonable doubt, would ultimately define the outcome. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 11 hours. When they returned, the verdict stunned the nation. Not guilty of first-degree murder. Not guilty of aggravated child abuse. Not guilty of manslaughter. Caylee Anthony was acquitted of the most serious charges. She was only found guilty of providing false information to law enforcement. The reaction was immediate and explosive. People across the United States were outraged. How could a mother who lied so extensively, who failed to report her child missing for a month, walk free after her child was found dead? For many, the verdict felt like a failure of justice. But for others, it was a reminder of how the legal system works. Suspicion is not proof. Emotion is not evidence. Years later, the Caylee Anthony case remains one of the most debated in modern true crime history. So what really happened to Caylee Anthony? There are several theories. The prosecution's theory is still the most widely believed. That Caylee Anthony intentionally killed her daughter to free herself from the responsibilities of motherhood. Supporters of this theory point to her behavior, her lies, and the circumstantial evidence presented at trial. Then there's the accidental drowning theory. The defense claimed Caylee died in the family pool and that panic led to a cover-up. Critics argue there is little concrete evidence to support this version, but it remains a possibility that some cannot entirely dismiss. Another theory suggests that Caylee's death may have been accidental in another way, perhaps involving neglect or an unintended overdose, followed by a desperate attempt to hide the truth. And finally, there are those who believe we may never know what truly happened. That the lies, the conflicting stories, and the lack of definitive evidence have created a mystery that cannot be solved. What makes this case so haunting isn't just the loss of a young life. It's the uncertainty. The feeling that something is missing, that the full truth was never revealed. Caylee Anthony eventually disappeared from the public eye, living a quiet and controversial life. But the shadow of this case follows her everywhere. For many, she will always be tied to the unanswered questions surrounding her daughter's death. And Caylee Anthony, a little girl whose life was cut tragically short, remains at the center of it all. A symbol of a case that captivated the world and left more questions than answers. If there's one thing this case teaches us, it's that truth can be elusive. That even in a courtroom, with evidence and testimony, certainty is not always possible. So now we turn it over to you. What do you believe happened to Caylee Anthony? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into the darkest and most mysterious cases, make sure to subscribe to Shadow Files and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Because sometimes, the most chilling mysteries are the ones that remain unsolved.